There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb that he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveller came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveller that had come to him. No, instead he took the ewe that belonged to the poor man, and he prepared it for the one who had come to him. How does that story make you feel? If you're like me, you feel a bit angry and frustrated at how awful that rich man was. And your heart probably went out to the poor man, the man who seemed so kind and gentle in raising this lamb almost as a member of his family. I suspect in just a few sentences, you've created a whole picture in your mind. You've created characters and emotions, and you even have an emotional response. This is a story that God's prophet Nathan told King David right after he slept with Bathsheba, another man's wife, and then had her husband killed. We are told that when David heard this story, he burned with anger. That is, until he realized that the story was about him. Because of that story, David's eyes were open to the awful things he had done. And you can read all about that in 2 Samuel chapter 12. Humans love stories. We love hearing them, whether it's watching a movie, reading a novel, a comic, playing a video game, or perhaps through a song or a poem. Stories capture our imaginations. Or we love the action, the drama, the resolution, the plot twists, the hero, the emotional experience of hearing a story. Stories can make us feel all kinds of things, can't they? They can make us laugh. They can bring us to tears. They can provoke us to action. They can change the way we look at the world. Stories are so much more interesting than facts. In that story I shared earlier, Nathan could have just told David what he was doing was wrong. But instead he tells a story. Because a story is not only more interesting than a fact, it's also much more powerful in creating change. Stories are one of the most powerful teaching tools that we have. And stories are also personal. We each have our own story. Now, it may lack some of the drama of a blockbuster movie, but it's still your story, and it's still being written. We may wish there were more exciting and compelling moments in our story, and I suspect, deep down, most of us hope our story will be significant, that it will matter, that it will be part of a bigger story. The good news is that there is a bigger story. Of all the stories that humans have told through generations, there is one story that rises above them all, the greatest story ever told. And it's not a work of fiction, it's a true story. It is God's story, revealed in the Bible, and it centers on the person and work of Jesus. You and I and every person in this planet is invited to enter into this story. Our little stories are invited to join the story of Jesus, who is the hero of God's story. And so that's why this course is called My Jesus Story. It's about telling your story as part of Jesus' story. My Jesus Story is all about how Jesus' story connects with my story. The Bible encourages us in the letter of 1 Peter. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. One way you can be prepared is to know how to tell your Jesus story. And I hope over these 3 sessions, you will be equipped to do just that. But before we get to your story, we first need to be clear on Jesus' story. Did you know that you are the only person with your story? No one else in the world has the exact same story as you. That is part of what makes your story so powerful. It is unique to you. There is great power in being personal. It can instantly build connection with those who are hearing your story. I could tell you about my 3 daughters, Emily, Caitlin, and Zali. We have fun building castles together out of Lego. And every time there comes a point when the youngest decides they've had enough. And as you can imagine, destruction and tears are the result. Now, with just a few sentences in that personal story, you now know several things about me. And at least one of them would have made you feel a little more connected to me. Maybe you relate to being a parent. Maybe we share a love of playing Lego. Or maybe you sympathize in managing the sadness and frustration of others. I might not have connected with everyone in that story, but I suspect most of you found some common ground in at least some part. And if you and I were sitting together on a bench having a conversation, I would be looking to see which part connected with you, and I would steer the conversation that way. Or if you got in first, you would make a comment about either parenting or Lego or destruction, whichever part connected with you. And the conversation would then go from there. This is how most conversations work. Of course, we tend to do it without thinking much about it. But this is what makes your personal story so powerful. As you tell your story, your listeners are likely building connections and common ground with you, even without realizing it. And it is through sharing your personal story that you can help people to see afresh the true power of Jesus' story. And so I'm going to ask you to reflect on your story, which only you can tell, and then consider how your story has been impacted by Jesus' story. Well, the pieces are in place. Hopefully, you have had a chance to clearly articulate Jesus' story, and you've had a good idea about your own story. So how do we bring these together? Well, there are many different ways you could tell your story. The idea behind my Jesus story is simply this: to use your story to point to Jesus' story. Ultimately, Jesus is not a part of our story, rather we are a part of his story. In our next session, we will explore how to tell a good story, and we will suggest a useful framework for how to tell your story in a way that points to Jesus' story. I'll see you then.